Hello and good afternoon. I would like to welcome everyone to today's Envoy Conversations event. We have a great event ahead of us, but before we get there, there are a few housekeeping items that I would like to go over. First, today's session is being recorded and all attendees will receive a copy of this recording. This will be sent out via email after today's live event and should arrive in your inboxes tomorrow afternoon. So please keep an eye out on that message. And please let us know if for whatever reason you do not receive that. So we'll be sure to send you that recording. We also encourage all attendees to ask some questions throughout today's event. To do so, please type your questions in via the GoToWebinar question box that you should see on your screen, and we'll try to get to your questions at the end of the main discussion. Finally, please excuse any audio or video interruptions that may occur as a result of internet connections. If you are experiencing severe difficulties, we recommend you close out the GoToWebinar and rejoin. We find that that tends to fix most connectivity issues. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Envoy Global CEO and President, Dick Burke.
Excellent. Thank you, Eric, and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Delighted to have you here today. This is a conversations series we've very much been looking forward to with Canada's Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, Minister Mendicino. So welcome, Minister. For those who aren't aware, Minister Mendicino is Toronto born. He is a big Maple Leafs fan. He was trained as a lawyer, former federal prosecutor, elected in 2015, re-elected in 2019. The same year he became the Minister of Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship. So welcome, Minister. Delighted to have you with us today.
Hey, Dick. Thanks very much, and greetings from sunny Toronto. And thanks for the very kind introduction. You know, being from Toronto, I think there's some real parallels when it comes to our sports franchises here. You mentioned the Leafs, and we were talking a little bit before we started today. We've got Austin Matthews as the sort of star of the franchise. But I'm thinking about that stretch of period that, long-suffering Chicago fans had to go through before they had the Chicago Bulls, who went on a dynasty run. Of course, in 2019, our Raptors won. So my hope is that not unlike after the Bulls, when the Hawks went on to go on a run, that now the Leafs will follow the Raptors and go on a bit of a run. And who knows? And, with Tom Brady winning the Super Bowl a couple days ago, I think it gives hope to our demographic. So I may yet try out. We'll see how it goes.
Well, you're kind of saying, it is interesting to say, you think about the Bulls, we had Luke Longley, we had a foreign national on that team. The Hawks were loaded with them, Taves and Duncan Keith. The Raptors had a few Americans that helped win for Toronto. And so a good segue into what we want to talk about today. Every year, it's interesting, Minister, we survey employers. We've got many scores of them on with us today, asking about U.S. policy, asking about Canada's policy, and they uniformly say 60, 65, 68% will say we're either in Canada or we're going to Canada because of the difference in immigration policy. So congratulations to you on putting it together. Walk me through, and for those perhaps a little bit less aware, what has been the administration's approach to immigration, sort of at the highest level, and then we'll drill in.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the highest level, it can be distilled to a simple proposition. That is, we believe that immigration generates growth, that it creates jobs. And our entire plan is focused on trying to accelerate our economic recovery coming out of the pandemic, because it goes without saying that we're operating in a very complex environment right now. But our plan charts out a course for growth. We have a 3-year plan that sort of breaks down by percentage ratios: 60%, which is focused on economic class immigration, a little bit more than 25% that's focused on family reunification, some of which are sponsored by our economic class immigrants. And then we've got the remaining percentage, which is dedicated to our work in resettling refugees. And certainly, in addition to the pandemic, which has exacerbated the challenges around migration, Canada takes our contributions to the world stage on offering safe refuge to the most vulnerable very, very seriously. Canadians are very passionate about it. In fact, we just celebrated the 5th anniversary of Operation Syrian Refugee, which began in 2015 where we have since welcomed 70,000 plus Syrian refugees from that part of the world. These are people who are giving back to our community. So it's a plan that's focused on growth and creating jobs. That's our approach.
Amazing. And I mean, the contrast to what's been happening in the United States, particularly the last 4 years, is noteworthy. And really what caught my ear on what you said, Minister, the prior administration said, hey, you know, COVID is proof that we've got to clamp down on immigration because, you know, too many people are unemployed. We need to preserve those jobs for Americans. It seems as though your government, under your leadership in part, is taking the opposite point of view. Explain why. Explain that if you could a little bit.
Well, as I mentioned off the top, I mean, there's no doubt that when the onset of COVID hit our continent, both of our countries, we had to take some very quick action at the borders to limit the movement of people, as we didn't know as much about the virus as we do today. And I think, you know, we stand by the decisions around restricting non-essential travel, and we're still in that moment. But having said that, we've also reimagined the way that we are doing immigration in a pandemic context. And what that has allowed us to do is keep open the corridors that will help us generate growth and spur on new jobs in some of the most essential parts of our economy. For example, in the healthcare sector, as well as when it comes to building infrastructure. So the talent that we seek to bring in, we have been able to do by adding rigorous health protocols at the border. A lot of that involves pre-arrival testing, additional quarantining protocols when they arrive, so that immigration has continued to be a lifeline to ensure that we get access to safe and affordable food, to ensure that we get access to health supplies, including vaccinations in a pandemic era. That's been our approach. And you know, look, we're still in this. We're not out of the woods, but it's an approach that I think has yielded some concrete results.
Amazing. I tip my hat to you and your government and your people for navigating it the way you have. Was it difficult to try to convince your citizenry that even in a time of COVID, when there is rising unemployment, when there's fear about the unknown, whether it's infection or others, that one of the right responses is to perhaps increase or maintain the focus on immigration? Was it difficult to do that because, you know, some folks in the United States are, like now's the time we got to really close the door? What was that like, that communication job?
Well, I think we start with the proposition that immigration doesn't take away jobs, it creates them. And I think the statistics bear that out. So in Canada, 1 in 3 businesses is owned by an immigrant. And those business owners are in turn employing hundreds of thousands of Canadians from coast to coast to coast. In addition to that, there are vacancies within our domestic workforce that we need to draw in talent to fill. And so we have innovated some really, I think, creative pathways that help to align that skill set to those vacancies. I'll give you one example. We have something called the Atlantic Immigration Pilot Program. Now, for your viewers, in Atlantic Canada, we've got an aging demographic that's slightly higher than everywhere else. And so what we've done is we've partnered very intentionally with local businesses and chambers, as well as the provincial regional governments there. And they have given us some of that granular data about what their needs are in their local communities. And we have allowed them to kind of sponsor very specifically candidates, that is newcomers, who possess the skills so that when they get here, they hit the ground running. And as a result of that faster integration, you've got the newcomer who's thriving in their job, you've got the employer that is sponsoring career development, and most importantly, for the demographic purposes, they are encouraged to stay in that part of the country. And again, this is all under the framework of a pilot, which we, because of its unequivocal success, is now going to be a permanent part of our overall immigration approach. So innovating in those ways has really demonstrated, I think, broadly to Canadians that immigration and bringing in really, you know, bright, hardworking people who want to add to their communities actually creates economic opportunity and growth. And that's how we're going to accelerate our recovery and chart out that long-term course for prosperity.
Amazing. And the contrast to the United States is startling. There's been talk in the United States of something that sounds perhaps a bit like what you did in Atlantic. It's called the Heartland Visa. There's some talk that perhaps the Biden administration will pursue it. And the notion is we know in the United States, Minister, that a large percentage of the visas that are issued go to the coastal areas. You know, New York, New Jersey, DC, Northern Virginia, Seattle, Northern California. What can we do to have a special allotment of visas to send people to Ohio, to Illinois, to Minneapolis, to St. Paul, to St. Louis, and things like that? Lessons you've learned. Was there resistance from Toronto and Waterloo, traditionally what I think of the hotbeds, Vancouver, say, wait a second, those visas should be coming here where the real nucleus is? How did you navigate that?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, you know, if we never said another word about Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, Edmonton, or Calgary, I mean, there would still be immigrants who I think who would be attracted to those large city centers because they've gained profile and prominence around the world. I think what we have learned is that there are other pockets of the country that equally want to access those talent pools so that they can spur on their own growth. And I've already mentioned one large part of the country. But in addition to that, like, we also have other pathways. For example, a pathway called the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot, where we, again, are partnering with, you know, diverse parts of the country who want to create an incentive to attract and retain that talent into their communities. And so the theme that sort of runs through all of this is that we recognize in government that policy doesn't, you know, begin and end just here, that it requires building partnerships in the private sector and with all orders of government. And that when you create that space for a constructive conversation and alignment, that you get out of that, I think, a much better overall approach to immigration. I mean, I think as well of our collaboration with the private sector in creating the global skill strategy. I know something that Envoy has really sort of embraced as well as an opportunity. And that, in short, is, again, a similar principled approach where we're working closely with blue chip CEOs and tech CEOs who need a very specific or niche skill set and want to attract that talent from abroad into the job. Here's a program under the global skill strategy where we've welcomed over 70,000 into it with a very fast turnaround on visas, like 14 days. Now, it's true in a pandemic that some of those processing times have been a bit disrupted and we're getting back to business as usual. But as far as our approach is concerned, it stems from collaboration with different orders of government as well as the private sector so that we get the best possible outcomes and results. And I think our numbers really show that.
Yeah, amazing. And it seems to be a tribute to collaboration and forward thinking, but it also seems to be, this is where my question's going, we talked about it a little bit before, undergirding all that, whether it's global skills strategy, whether it's this Atlantic program, the fact that 1 out of 3 jobs or businesses are owned or formed by immigrants, there seems you've been able to convince your citizenry that immigrants create jobs versus take jobs. And that is this persistent yawning debate within the United States. I very much have to agree with you, Minister, on this point, but we struggle to thoughtfully and compassionately make that point to others who've frankly struggled in the United States economy in the last 20 years. If you were dropped into the United States and you were in charge of it, how would you create more of a fact-based dialogue where you would succeed in showing that this is how you create jobs versus take them? Because then I think once you get past that, it seems to me a lot of good things happen.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I would begin by saying that it involves a lot of hard work, that it does require cooperation with governments. It does require, frankly, a lot of dialogue with members of different political stripes and sort of appealing to that sense that, you know, here in Canada, that we relate to immigration, that newcomers are our co-workers, they are our neighbors, and in many cases, like, they are our relatives and our family members and friends. And so I think it is that persistence with very much a sense of this is not only an economic imperative, that there are really good, concrete, evidence-based reasons why immigration generates growth. Immigration reflects who we are as a people. And that is something that requires day in and day out diligence. You know, just before this roundtable, I was having a discussion with the CEO of a blue chip company here in Canada, and the question was posed, how can we help? And I talked about sharing that positive narrative as broadly as we can. And I think if there's one thing that I have reflected on, it's that successive governments of every political stripe have sometimes bared too much of the burden of having to promote the story of immigration. And if we really want to succeed, it's something that I think we need to reach across not only partisan lines, but also into the private sector and into our settlement services sector, who do incredible work and really take up this mantle together. So I say this with a lot of affection for our American friends, and the people-to-people ties are so profound, they're so deep. We see that there is a real opportunity to continue to do this work together, and I certainly was encouraged that President Biden's first call was to Prime Minister Trudeau, which I think really underscores the uniqueness and the special quality of our relationship. And so going forward, I look forward to that collaboration with you as well.
Yeah, well, amen. I was thrilled to see that, and it just seems it's such an opportunity and so many lessons in what you're saying, Minister, about what those joining us today can do to create the narrative that immigration is viewed, as all the academics say, that it's job creative versus job destructive. So that's really, really helpful. For those who don't know, share with those with us today how ambitious your plans, the government's plans are regarding growing Canada through immigration. I mean, it is audacious.
Well, I appreciate you saying that because certainly we had a choice coming out of the 2020 year that we could have either paused or even cut immigration. But my view and our government's view is that we needed to keep moving forward and that we needed to keep growing immigration. So to put this in some numeric terms, in 2021, we hope to land 401,000 new immigrants. Next year, that's 22, it'll be 411, and then in 23, it'll be 421. And so over the course of the next 3 years, we hope to welcome 1.2 million Canadians, again, all of whom we expect are going to contribute to our economic recovery in some of the most vital sectors of our economy, whether it's healthcare, building and infrastructure, and yeah, in the tech sector as well. While we navigate the pandemic, we're also at the same time reimagining the way that we do immigration. So I think people tend to have this image of conventional immigration resulting in people coming across borders. Because we've had to put in place protocols and restrictions, that's obviously complicated for the time being. So we're in a unique moment right now to look at the domestic talent pool that is already in Canada. These are the temporary status folks who are our workers, our international students, as well as our asylum seekers who come to Canada seeking a better life. And so I think, real orientation right now to getting to 401,000 is, yeah, we look forward to that day when borders will reopen. But in the meantime, is there a way for us to be very intentional in looking at the temporary immigrants who are here, particularly in those areas which are contributing to our response to COVID-19, and broadening those roads and those pathways to permanent residency and accelerating them at a rate that is unprecedented, so that we can meet out both our short-term economic needs as well as our long-term demographic challenges. And that's very exciting. And in particular, in the international students program, like, I think you've got a young cohort who are here attending a higher educational institution that has been recognized by our provincial partners as being COVID ready, and they're hungry, like they are motivated and they want to contribute. So it's great that they're here. They initially came on a temporary visa. We want them to stay. We want them to stay for all of the reasons that I've already mentioned. And certainly we are actively planning to implement that approach this year and beyond.
So timely and topical. Thank you for that. It reminds me, we partnered Envoy. We partner closely with Bill Kerr, who's a professor at Harvard Business School, and he writes about global talent streams. And he has a metaphor to plumbing. And he said the student visa pipeline it's an enormous pipe. But the problem in the United States is it gets very, very narrow after they graduate, and it displaces so many people because they're not able to flow all the way through and get one of these work jobs, principally in the form of an H-1B in the United States. And he said, and then the challenge is going from that visa status to an immigrant status. And again, the pipe gets too narrow again as well. It sounds as though your government, perhaps part of the Global Skills, perhaps a series of other initiatives, has found a way for those students who come out of fantastic universities in Canada to not, the Canadian employers can retain them and not, there's not a big pipe turning into a little pipe, if that makes sense. Talk about how that works. How you've got, whether it's Waterloo, whether it's all these other incredible colleges, how do you keep them there now that they're there, policy-wise?
I got one very recent example that I would offer, and that is just last week we announced the launch of a Hong Kong initiative whose primary objective is to incentivize recent graduates, that is within the last 5 years, from a higher educational institution to come to Canada on an open work permit with a transitional pipeline to permanent residence. And a lot of that incentive is around, I think, a couple things. One, clearly how long it will take. So we've looked at ways to accelerate that transition and to shorten that pathway without in any way compromising the integrity of our immigration approach. But the second thing is, obviously, and we've talked about it a little bit, but the Canadian experience, and there are some hallmarks to Canadian life, which we are very proud of, and again, which we work very hard to preserve. I think about access to healthcare and education and retirement security as the sort of tri-pillars of what makes the Canadian way of life such an attractive destination of choice for immigrants in the first place. But in order to preserve that, we've got to continue to grow. So there's a real synergy between attracting and retaining that talent and protecting that way of life in the long run. I think the other thing is that we're taking that approach, and we want to look at the entirety of our pool and be really, really selective at looking at the parts of the economy that need reinforcements. And I'll come back to the healthcare sector, where I think we've done something really ingenuitive there as well. Around the sort of high point of the first wave, that was last spring, right. And in Quebec, we saw a number of asylum seekers who did not have final status, who themselves are a very vulnerable population, step up, volunteer, work in hospitals, work in some of those long-term care homes where COVID-19 has just ravaged and been really difficult. And, recognizing that, there was a groundswell of support from the community that said, look, these are people that rolled up their sleeves, and without any real promise or quid pro quo, they put themselves in harm's way to help the most vulnerable here in Canada. Those are the elderly and the sick, and they helped in our response to COVID-19. So we announced an initiative called the Guardian Angels program, whereby even those without final status now have a pathway to becoming permanent residency. Why is that good? Because we need reinforcements in our healthcare sector. Those frontline heroes who've been going flat out now for a year need help. And so we can merge the goodwill of this vulnerable population who obviously want to stay with our economic needs in responding to COVID-19. I think people can get their heads wrapped around that. And that's how we are innovating, despite all the challenges, to leverage immigration in a way that will be beneficial to all Canadians.
I'm blown away just to the amount that your government's able to achieve, in contrast to the, just the blockage with respect to any type of meaningful immigration reform in the United States. It's really a tribute to you. How difficult is it to navigate geographic, differences? You talked about the need for collaboration, and you talked about how you're reaching into rural communities that have particular needs, dealing with the academic community. Is there a variance amongst attitudes around immigration from the urban areas to the more rural areas, to the west, from the west to the east, or is it relatively homogenous the way they think about immigration?
Well, if anything, what I've experienced is that there is an ongoing, I think, recognition that we need immigration right across the country, and that need will certainly fluctuate on the basis of the skill set and the experience and the talent that you're looking for. But I would say, encouragingly, that in Canada, my experience with provincial partners and with local partners is that there is a real thirst for immigration, that there, if anything, is a desire to look at new innovative pathways to attract hardworking newcomers who want to lend their efforts to the cause of building this country up from the ground to those specific communities. And so, you know, with some of the examples we've offered, like in Atlantic Canada, the immigration pilot there, in rural parts, you know, the rural and northern immigration pilot. Another example of a program that we're hoping to launch shortly is the Municipal Nominee program. So this would allow, you've got local mayors and local chambers of commerce who would be able to access a designated number of allocated positions to sponsor, again, in a very targeted way, the skills possessed by a newcomer into the community. And that too would be a pipeline. So what I guess what I'm saying is that in my many conversations with stakeholders far and wide, that there is pretty much uniformly an appetite to continue to grow economically through new jobs in concert with immigration. And you know, that does take a lot of energy and a lot of work, but I see it as perhaps one of the most important nation building exercises that we are currently embarked on.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more around nation building. And so often lost is the demographic requirement that immigration can address. Couple of questions. You know, we're blessed at Envoy. We're depending on how you count, third, fourth biggest player in the immigration space in the United States. 60+% of our those we serve, many of whom are on with us today, they say they're either in Canada or thinking about Canada. Majority are have need for STEM talent. Obviously, they range from B2B software, fair amount of B2C companies, a lot of insurance, a lot of fintech, and then some old line manufacturers. Here's your chance to make your pitch. What would be the 2 or 3 programs that you think might be most appealing or might be most valuable to them as they constantly butt up against insufficient number of H-1Bs, varying adjudication of their cases, doubling of RFEs in the United States, quadrupling of case denials in the past administration? What would be the 2, 3, 4 programs that you think, based on what you understand about our client base, the folks on with us today, Minister, what do you think would be those programs they'd be most interested in?
Specifically, I would say the global skills strategy, where, you know, we've got a quick turnaround on visas and where we're working very closely with employers in Canada who are looking for top talent, primarily in the sectors you just described. I think, you know, as we start to get back to business as normal and better going forward, the visitor visa startup program, which is a program designed to spur on startups and entrepreneurialism here in Canada. I maintain that our immigration system is one of the great levers and incentives to investment from abroad. And the reason for that is because I think of the pipelines that we have created, our ability to evolve and fine tune our express entry system. That is the economic class of immigration that I referred to at the outset. In addition to that, transitioning temporary status immigrants into the permanent status, which I've already described a little bit. So there's not only, I think, a broad pipeline there, but there's a fast pipeline for talent to transition to permanent residency and hopefully as well citizenship. And, you know, that allows me to shine a light a little bit on how we're transforming the way we do business right now. And it goes without saying that, you know, our system has conventionally been very paper-based, but we want to be digital. I mean, my vision of the immigration system going forward is that it's entirely digital, online, touchless, integrated, and seamless. And we are getting there. We're getting there now. And so on citizenship, we've already welcomed, I mean, this may sounds small in US terms, but in Canadian terms, 50,000 new citizens in the midst of the pandemic. And we've done that by moving our citizenship ceremonies online, as well as our testing phase. So that's been great. And as well, we're also transitioning that in our permanent residency pipeline. So more of the interviews that we do to close out your permanent residency application will be done virtually and through Zoom. So by transitioning to more digital, we are really increasing the rate at which we can transition people into our economy, into our communities. And that's building on what I already think has been held out as a model of success when it comes to integration. And don't take it from me, the OECD wrote a report in 2019 that said that Canada is one of the best, if not the best in class on this. So, you know, it's something that we're working very hard at, and that is making sure that people, you know, in your country and right around the world see Canada as a top destination of choice to land talent.
Well, thank you. I was going to ask you about digitization and the strategies around that and your thinking around it. We obviously deeply believe in it. We think the winning global mobility programs leverage the best lawyering and the best technology, and superior outcomes follow. That's our entire thesis in a sentence. And so it shocks us that in the United States, you can file your taxes electronically, so you can, you know, get your parking stickers done electronically. So much you can do electronically, but not immigration. And it is still very, very paper intensive. It's been very complicated because of COVID. Walk through for folks not familiar, what is the process? How digitized is the process? You talked about the naturalization ceremony, you talked about the interview, you talked about the test. How about the processes that precede that in the GSS program, for instance?
Well, I think historically, what we've done is we've had paper-based applications. So, you know, I think under the old model in many of these processes, you would sit down, maybe with a consultant, maybe with a lawyer, maybe with a service like yours, and ask for the support to sort of take them through the questions that are necessary for the outcome that you want. And it's a bit of a choose your own adventure. Are you going to visit? Are you going to work? Are you going to study? Are you applying for refugee status? Each and every one of these doors opens up to a different process. And so that's how it was. How we are today is that some of those are now going online, and as a result, you're able to upload your personal data to secure and remote servers, most of which are here in Canada, for the purposes of filing an application, which we then hope to turn around as quickly as possible. Where we want to be going forward is that each and every line of business is entirely digital, remote, and therefore you are able to do this seamlessly with support from my department and from other supporting services, so that you get the quickest possible turnaround. And I actually think coming out of the pandemic, we are going to be far more efficient than we ever were prior to COVID-19. That's not only because of digital transformation, it's also because the pandemic has really taught us at breakneck speed how to learn some of these lessons and incorporate them. And I've already given you a couple of examples where I think we've seen some real results.
Well, I'm embarrassed to say, once again, you're ahead of us. For those, you know, not familiar with the numbers, when the minister talks about adding 410, 420,000, you can, as a crude rule of thumb, you can multiply by 10 to give you a sense of the population numbers. That'd be like the United States government saying, we're going to try to add 4 million this year and another 4 million next year for all these reasons. So it really speaks to the I'd argue the wisdom and the breadth of your initiatives. I should have flagged at the beginning, the top of the hour, but I will do now. For folks listening in, I suspect you've got a lot of questions. We're thrilled to have the minister. You've got the boss with us today, so get your questions ready. We're going to open it up shortly to you, and so please take this opportunity. We know there's real interest in Canada from our client interactions and from the surveying we do, and you got the boss man with us today. So get ready. One question that comes up quite a bit in the United States. We talked about the Heartland visa. Of course, you already got that. We talk about digitization. Of course, you already got that. We also talk in the United States with a bit more ambivalence, frankly, around a points-based system. You know, the process in the United States is for employment-based, the employer sponsors. We do not assign points based on age or fluency or education level. Those may be criteria to grant to generate a winning application, but we don't rely on the government to assess points. Tell me your sense of the two different approaches we take. And a lot of people say, "Oh, we got to go points. We got to go points." Give them the real view is the positives and the negatives, to the extent you see any, around a points-based system versus an employer-based system like we have, Minister.
I can certainly speak to what I think are some of the advantages of having a points-based systems approach, which we have integrated into our express entry program, and that is the flagship under which we welcome economic class immigrants. when you take a points-based approach, you can really take a look at some of the competencies that you were looking for to set up the newcomer for long-term success. So that includes a language and education and specific skill set. And we really are quite nimble in our capacity to make the necessary adjustments to those points based on the current needs of our economy. I think where we continue to look to grow in our calibration of the point system, it's in learning at a more regional, local, and right at the grassroots level, what are those needs so that we can be as fine-tuned in aligning that gap with the skill set that we want to attract to the specific part of the country where we're looking for it. So there I think is a lot of upside to having a points-based approach, which again has been recognized abroad. And that work is undertaken in concert with our provincial and municipal partners. We also get a lot of feedback from our settlement sector, and it'll just give me an opportunity to say a huge thank you to folks like you who in Canada are helping newcomers navigate a lot of these different pathways. And so because of that, because we value that support, that partnership, we are investing robustly so that people who are interested in coming to Canada, who are sort of looking at one of those options for their pathway to coming to Canada, can start that even before they get here. So, through co-investments with settlement sectors, there's a lot of digital literacy, there's a lot of digital orientation and virtual orientation, and as a result of that, it just really it accelerates their ability to come to Canada and really hit the ground running. That partnership with the settlement sector is very important, but it's also supported by robust investments, which again we see as a very prudent investment, which provides a return.
Yeah, positive ROI for sure on that. I want to double back to what you said about universities, because it's such a pain point in the United States. Great universities in the United States, but there's way more folks getting out of this U.S. universities foreign-born than there are visa openings. So how do you work in partnership with those universities to ensure that you're not spending all this time educating them and then just sending them back to a country other than Canada? Is it? It sounds like you don't have nearly the resistance we have, but maybe just a minute or two on that, because I think that's going to be of real interest to our participants today who are looking to get these best and the brightest kids out of college, and they can't get them a U.S. visa.
Well, for sure, we're really proud of our educational sector in Canada, and we know that there are lots of institutions who partake in the international student program, all the way from primary school up to graduate school. And in the case of the younger students who come, they're often coming with their parents who are coming hopefully under an economic program. But for international students who are looking to come to Canada to take up a degree or a diploma, this is a program that has seen quantum growth over the last number of years, in large part because of the reputation of these schools, as well as the Canadian way of life, which we think is a huge incentive. But in addition to that, as I've said, we've really worked hard during the pandemic to preserve these corridors. And how have we done that? Well, we've enhanced online educational opportunities so that when those corridors were temporarily shut down at the outset of the pandemic, international students who were hoping to come could start their classes abroad. That was the first thing. The second thing that we did was that for international students who were already here in Canada, we provided them with greater work permit flexibility so that while classes were suspended or were put off altogether, that they could contribute their skill set and their experience, which would count, which we think in the long run will hopefully count towards the ability to transition to permanent status. And I think going forward, what we've done is we've revived the corridor for international students so that they can come, but we have done so working extremely closely with provincial governments who are responsible for the day-to-day administration of the educational sector. They carry the responsibility to manage schools, and no one gets an international student visa unless and until the province has approved that school where they are attending as being COVID ready. That means, wow, mandatory quarantining, all the PPE in place, social distancing protocol. those measures are in place. They are very rigorously adhered to, and we obviously watch that very closely. So by doing those three things, we have put ourselves in a position to retain that population here with something that, you know, may look what I've described previously as an accelerated transitional path to permanent residency.
Very, very forward thinking and impressive, frankly. One last question, a little longer down the road. You know, COVID has taught us a lot of things, right? One is the need for proximity, particularly in the work environment and office environment, is perhaps not all that important. And if you take that notion that, hey, listen, I can be as effective working from home as I can be in the office, and you blow that out, you could say, well, if you can do your work 10 miles away, you can do your work 1,000 miles away or 10,000 miles away in a different country. Is there been thought to whether that growing acceptance of distance, I'll call it, might jeopardize the very audacious plans you have, and what implication will it have to global mobility more generally? Obviously, it probably doesn't impact your refugee work, your asylum work. Those things do not, maybe accelerated, but more on the economic driven, that part that you said was about 60-65% of the action. And too early to tell?
I think that's a really interesting question. And I think, you know, you sort of delineated the important distinction between you know, involuntary migration, that is the movement of people around the world because of war and conflict, persecution, increasingly, I'll note, because of the dramatic changes that we are seeing in climate right around the world. People are going to be displaced, and they're going to be looking for, I think, stability. They're going to be looking for a quality of life that certainly may be better than what they are currently experiencing wherever they're coming from. But Canada has a lot going for it. I think so too does the United States of America. You know, we're two close friends. We share this border. You know, we live on a continent that is surrounded by big oceans, and, you know, being good friends, we have a competitive advantage that I think that is really in many ways the envy of a lot of other parts of the world. So I think there's a lot of room for scope of collaboration to seize the opportunity. And as far as the movement of people, you know, post-pandemic, looking for economic opportunities, you know, that is one that we should really keep a close eye on. I think quite apart from the pandemic, there, I think, have been really interesting conversations around, you know, where people work, and are they working increasingly at home, or are there still going to be corridors of transportation where, you know, you have your home space and your workspace. I think that is a very thought-provoking question, but certainly in the meantime, from where we sit, that once we're past the pandemic, and I am an optimist, as you can probably tell, that a lot of the migratory patterns are going to be pent up, and there's going to be a lot of demand for movement. And I think we have done everything that we can to position ourselves for success with a plan that's focused on the future, a plan that's focused on economic recovery and long-term growth. And I'm looking forward to that day, as I'm sure you are, Dick.
I am, very, very much so. I've got one last very important immigration question before I flip it back to Eric with questions. So you're the boss of Canadian immigration. You can take one American-born hockey player and drop him into a Maple Leaf sweater. Who do you snatch and give super expedited visa to?
Well, can I pick a Canadian-born who's playing on an American team? Because that would probably be Sid Crosby. But even now, he's an ultimate competitor. Boy, oh boy, like a solid American-born player right now. Geez, I got to come back to you on that. You got to give me 30 seconds. There's a lot. There's some really good ones to come to think about. But let me come back to that before we end our conversation.
Awesome. That'll be our wrap up. Okay, so with that, I hope folks have enjoyed the questions I had. I suspect you've got a lot of questions, perhaps even better ones. So I'm going to flip it back to Eric, our MC. Eric, any questions submitted yet?
Yes, we have a couple. So I'll just start with the first one. Minister, with respect to top Canadian talent that lives or have lived in the United States, have you seen a trend in reversing the quote brain drain due to COVID?
I think if anything, what we've seen is an increase in demand, and I think that's in part because people have looked at Canada and they are seeing the way in which we are innovating our systems and our pathways in a pandemic era so that we can be positioned to attract that talent. I know that certainly with the new administration coming in, as I said, I think there's a lot of room for collaboration on this. We were chatting before the discussion right now that there's more than enough demand to go around, and I think that there's a lot of excitement there. But if anything, I think there has been an increase in demand to come to Canada in the pandemic for the long run because we have really tried to be quite adept at evolving our systems in a way that is incentivizing.
Thank you, Minister.
Great, thank you. Next question. Can you speak to some of the avenues that Canada is considering regarding expanded permanent residency pathways for those already in Canada on temporary status?
For sure, and I think we've kind of touched on it, but there are sort of three principal groups that we're looking very carefully at: temporary workers, international students, and refugees and asylum seekers, all of whom come on a temporary basis. And so our approach is to look at those populations, see who is sort of best aligned to meet our economic needs and our long-term prosperity, and to try and revisit what are the policies and the eligibility criteria that will potentially incent them to stay. That is, make the transition from being here on a temporary status to permanent status. And I think that the hallmark that kind of we think will really influence this approach is if you're already here and you're already contributing, then we want you to stay. And you probably chose Canada for some very good reasons. So we think there's a real synergy there. So that's where we're at right now.
Great, thank you. Third question. Actually, it's a combination of quite a few. So we've had a few questions about delays in processing this year, likely due to the challenges imposed by COVID. How is the IRCC working to invest or restructure to help clear those backlogs?
Well, I think three main ways. One is obviously we've made the investments in our personnel, so we want to be sure that we're staffed up appropriately, and that's something that we've put in place in conjunction with our immigration plan. The second is to go increasingly digital, and I've talked a little bit about some of our lines of business where we've made, I think, real leaps there. And third and finally, it's being creative with our policies, being flexible, being innovative, and being prepared to sort of move at a faster rate than we've ever had to, so that we can minimize the disruption that was caused by COVID-19. So in those very three specific ways, I think we are demonstrating an ability and a capacity not only to, again, make up for lost time, but to become even more efficient in the long run. And the early results of 2021 are really encouraging on that front.
Got it. Thank you. Moving along to the next question. For those with specific questions about their cases, what would be the best avenue for them to get more information and support?
Call Envoy. I'll answer that one, Minister.
Well, there you go. You've got your answer right off the top. We've got an IRCC call, an email center. We take on a lot of those questions. I certainly try to be, and my staff try to be accessible for some of the more complex cases. We work with elected politicians of every stripe. We try to get results. We know that in a pandemic era that there is often a hiccup here and there, but look, we're really motivated to try and get results. And so in combination between our department, my team, and the settlement sector, like what we've got right here with Envoy, I think we work at it really hard to get good results as quickly as we can.
Got it. Thank you. Next question here is, the plan you outlined has goals set for the next 3 years, but how far out are you looking, and what sorts of factors are you looking at to evolve those targets?
The targets for growth, is that?
That's what-
Yes.
Yeah, so the way that we approach our goals is we consult pretty extensively with other orders of government, but we also work really closely with the business sector. And there are a couple of chambers, as well as the Business Council of Canada, who are, proactively solicited for advice and for input on what's the right level. We also look at the evidence, like we look at the demographics. And, as I've mentioned on a couple of occasions, our workforce right now in Canada needs immigration to continue to sustain growth, and that's because of declining birth rates. So we take a look at all of that information. We sort of support it with what we're hearing anecdotally and in our discussions with some real experts in the area, and we come up with a number that we think we can manage, and we work hard to share that narrative broadly. So that's how we approach our exercise and arriving at a target.
Great. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Eric. I think I want to be mindful of time, and I want to give the minister time to answer my very probing question. I can't offer Patrick Kane. It would just decimate my Blackhawks too much.
I was gonna say Kane. I'm not kidding. I am not even kidding. You're like the Oracle. Like, I don't know, you pulled that out of my mind. But Kane has still got a great stick, and he's a great sniper. I'd love to see him play on a wing with Austin and with Mitch Marner. So if you don't mind, can you put in a word and see if he'll come? Well, hopefully when the pandemic is done, we'll be able to have him actually come and skate. Right now, it's a little bit hard, but I'd love to have Patrick Kane.
It's a good choice. I can't tell you how grateful I am to be able to spend an hour with you, Minister. I sense you can tell by my questions and my responses how dead on I think your government is approaching immigration, and what a benefit it's going to be for your country economically, civically, culturally, across the board. So thank you for your time today. Really appreciate it. Best of luck. Keep up the good work.
Dick, it's been great to speak with you, and to your viewers. Thanks so much for tuning in. Thanks for all the work you're doing in the immigration space. And look, I'd be happy to come back sometime, talk a little bit more about immigration, and of course, a little bit about sports. So it's been great to be with you. Thanks a bunch, Dick.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. And thank you all for joining us. Eric, I'll flip it back to you in case there's any final housekeeping elements.
Thank you both for the great discussion. Just want to quickly mention to our attendees that you can connect with the minister via his LinkedIn. The link is on the slide here. And to stay informed about future Envoy Conversations sessions and to access the previous recordings, you can visit the link there, envoyglobal.com/conversations. And additionally, I hope to see everyone this Thursday for our next conversation events, where academics immigration policy recommendations to the Biden administration.
Well, there's a good cheat sheet going on up north if folks are really that curious. They're onto it in Canada. Thanks again, Eric, and thank you, Minister. Good afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you.